Good evening. Welcome to the Monday, December 9th, 2024 Board of Supervisors meeting. This meeting is now called to order. I will now conduct roll. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
Mr. Lyons.
Here.
Mr. Day. Mr. Lewis.
Present.
And I am present. We will now offer an invocation followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Those attending are not required to participate, but if you'd like to join us, please stand.
Lord, as we come into the Christmas season, let us be ever mindful of the true reason for the celebration, a time to be thankful for all the gifts that you have bestowed upon us. Lord, I pray that you will be with those that are hurting at this time. Give them the strength and support that they need. And now I ask you for the wisdom and guidance for this board as we make our decisions here this afternoon. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We will hold citizens' comments near the beginning of the meeting. We will do our best to take citizen comment remotely. There are two options for citizens to offer comment. To join by telephone, you may dial in to one of the numbers listed in the county website. Webinar ID and password are there for your convenience. Citizens wishing to simply view the meeting live or after the fact can do so in the Rockbridge County Board of Supervisors YouTube channel, also available on the county website. If you wish to make a citizen comment as a Zoom meeting participant, you will use the raise your hand feature. You can press raise hand button on the bottom of your Zoom window or press *9 if you are calling in by telephone. Are there any changes to the agenda?
I have none.
Recognitions and presentations. Mr. Suter?
Yes, some years ago, the board generously implemented an employee milestone recognition program in which employees are recognized for their service to the county at 5-year milestones. And staff reaching these milestones in a given year receive a bonus for their service in December in time for Christmas. So it's $50 per each 5 years. So, for example, 10 years would $50 for each 5 years service, for each additional 50 for each 5 years. So we got a little behind in sending these notifications out this year to staff. So I would like to invite the folks that I'm getting ready to list to the board's first meeting in January to be publicly recognized and hopefully thanked by the board. So this year's list of honorees includes, and this is the folks in the 5-year mark: Janet Mayo, collection attendant in recycling; Bailey Trent, administrative specialist with Fire and Rescue Department; Mercedes Smith, teacher with our preschool program; Thomas Andrews, captain of our Fire Rescue in Fire Rescue Department; Kenny Buchanan, collection attendant in recycling; and 10 years, Roy Crawford, collection attendant in recycling; Charles Bowden, collection attendant in recycling. 15 years is Brandy Flint, Director of Economic Development. 20 years is Hank Leach, our GIS Specialist in Community Development, and also Rhonda Miller in the Building Department. And we're getting up there some really big milestones here. 35 years, Dwayne Schaefer, Preschool Director. And the crowning achievement here is Julie Weitzel, Supervisor of Accounts in the Finance Department, has been here for 45 years. So I'd like to bring them back, and we've got certificates for them that we will present. And I just want to get this in front of you so we could get the checks cut this morning.
Thank you very much. We appreciate their hard work and dedication. We look forward to recognize them at our next meeting.
That is those that can attend. It's kind of tough, especially some of the fire rescue folks and collection center attendants. If they're on shift and they don't get off until 6 o'clock, it's hard to get up here. So we'll do our best.
We will now welcome citizen comments. When your name is called, please address the board at the podium stating your first and last name and magisterial district. Please limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes. There is a timer on the table for your convenience. Is there anyone signed up?
No, ma'am.
Is there anyone online?
Looks like I am. Nope.
Is there anyone out there that would like to speak? We will move on to the county financial report and appropriation resolution. Mr. Harrison.
Yes, before you is a resolution authorizing additional appropriations and the payment of bills. The total amount of bills this period is $745,197.06. Additional appropriations include $37,556 for repairs to the courthouse chiller. This is separate from the HVAC that we were just replaced. This is the AC. And also, we are requesting $202,435 additional funds for the revenue sharing payment with the city of Lexington. We were short in our budget, even though. So the total amount of the FY25 revenue sharing payment based on the FY24 audit is $2,599,414. Separately, we'd like to request a transfer from the ARPA fund to the general fund in the amount of $1,764,050.75. This is, as you are aware, this money has to be spent or obligated by December 31st of this year. We'd like that money applied to the Natural Bridge Elementary School HVAC project. The reason for that is there's been, and Mr. Suter will touch on this during his report on the broadband. Some of those, notably the Brightspeed grant, will have to be rescoped. So it will, signing a contract, therefore obligating the funds will not happen until after December 31st. So that was brought to the Finance Committee, who agreed to bring it to the full board. Also attached are revenue and expense reports for the fiscal year through 11/30 of this year. General fund revenues total $28,494,256. General fund expenditures total $27,983,360. So the year-to-date difference is up $510,896. 42% of the fiscal year has passed. Year-to-date sales tax amounts to $1,889,995, or 43% of the estimated budget. Mills tax is at $1,452,937, or 43%. Lodging tax revenues is at $766,897, or 42%. And admissions tax is at $220,642, or 63% of the estimated budget. Also enclosed in your packet was this spreadsheet showing the month and year-over-year comparisons.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Are there any questions, comments? Is there a motion to adopt the proposed resolution?
So move.
Second. Mr. Lyons?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Day?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Aye.
And I vote yes.
Madam Chair, would you also consider a separate a motion for approving the ARPA funds?
Certainly.
So move. Second.
Mr. Lyons?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Day? Mr. Lewis?
Aye.
And I vote yes. Consideration of amendments to Community Service Board membership composition. Mr. Suter.
Thank you. As you're aware, the Rockbridge Area Community Services Board provides mental health services to the localities of Rockbridge County, Bath, Lexington, and Buena Vista. And that board was created by resolution of those partners all the way back in 1982, as enabled and directed by the Code of Virginia. The bylaws have changed some over the years, and currently there is a 15-member board of directors. Of that board, 6 members are appointed by Rockbridge County, and 3 members each are appointed by the other 3 partners, Bath, Lexington, and Buena Vista. CSB Executive Director Kim Shaw, who is with us here tonight, has for several years explored the potential to reduce the number of members from 15 to 10 to increase efficiency and coordination of that board. She's proposed to do this through attrition, so no one would be asked to leave the board. It would just be as terms expire that this would happen if approved. We'd still have to adhere to membership requirements under the Code of Virginia For example, at least one member would need to be a person or family member of a person who is receiving or has received services from the Community Services Board. In your package, Mr. Dryden has included track copies of the current bylaws and also a resolution for your consideration. Bath County has already implemented this change effectively. I wasn't clear if they've passed a resolution yet to do this, but they didn't appoint at the last time to begin implementing this change. And the cities of Lexington and Buena Vista will be taking this up later this month. And at this point, Ms. Shaw, Mr. Dryden, or I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And again, this resolution is subject to the other localities following suit.
Fine. Ms. Shaw, anything you'd like to add? Don't want to put you on the spot. Don't need to. All right.
For the record, for the recording, she responded that she didn't think there was anything that needed to be added.
Gentlemen, any other questions or comments? If not, is there a
The
motion?
only comment that I had was in the write-up. It's got that Bath, Lexington, Buena Vista reduced by 1 from 4 to 3, and it's actually from 3 to 2, correct?
That's correct. And Ms. Shaw caught that, and I apparently posted the wrong one because I corrected it. Apparently I just didn't put the right one. Okay, that's correct.
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
Is there a second? Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Day?
Yes.
Mr. Lyons?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Aye.
And I vote yes. Discussion on tax exemption for nonprofits, Mr. Dryden.
County administration is made aware that certain non-for-profits are in the process of applying for tax exemptions for personal property, which they use for their not-profit activity. Prior to bringing those applications before the board to consider whether or not to grant such exceptions, we thought it might be of value to the board to give an overview of the law and the procedures to receive tax exemptions and how they would apply in these cases. The Board of Supervisors, as the governing body of the county, has the authority from under the Article 10 and Section 6 of the Constitution of Virginia to grant exceptions for two types of exceptions for property tax. One is an exception by designation, and that means a particular piece of property will be brought before the board by a not-for-profit or by an entity which qualifies, and the board would then grant it for that particular piece of property. The other one is by classification, where the board could grant, for example, all vans used by not-for-profits for the purpose of that will be exempt from tax. That could be done that way. By practice, these are normally done by designation, not by classification, but it is within the board authority to do so. The application process is just for designation. So the application process will come to the board for particular pieces of property seeking exemptions for those particular pieces of property. If the board wishes to proceed with this, the board would then, the process would be the board would schedule a public hearing to be held on the particular exemption. A notice would need to be published in the paper at least 7 days prior to the public hearing. And the notice needs to include the fair market value of the property, description of the property, the fair market value of the property, and the amount of tax assessed against the property. Once that's done, the board public hearing would be held, and then the board would need to make a determination where to grant this based on factors that are described in section 58.13651 of the Code of Virginia. Those are contained in the board report, and I attached the Code of Virginia to the board report. Those factors are generally whether or not it's a 501c registered charity with the federal government, and then several factors whether or not the property inures to anyone's particular private benefit, whether the officers of the charity are overpaid. Those are things that normally apply under whether you qualify as under 501c3. But there are under the 8 issues listed by this code section, the last 2 deal with things that are particular to the board. One would be what is the revenue impact to the county by granting this? And number two would be any other factors that you think should be considered in deciding whether or not to to issue the ordinance and grant the exception. Keep in mind that when these ordinances are granted, they are particular to the property to which that seeks. So by granting an ordinance for, again, the example of a van, it would only apply to that particular van to which it was granted. It would not bind the board to do it to any other charity that comes forward with any other property. So it doesn't necessarily, there is no legal precedent set by granting it in one case. You do have the right then to not grant it in another case if you feel that it's not appropriate to do so. The procedure would be that we do have an application process, and that there are application forms which I've attached to the board report, which shows the two different applications we have for personal property and for real property. And these applications are filled out and then filed with the Commissioner of the Revenue, at which time we are made aware that they're pending, and we would then approach the board to see whether or not the board would want to schedule a public hearing to discuss that particular application. And then it would move ahead as I previously described. You'd have the public hearing, and then the board would consider it based on the factors contained in the board report.
So that would suggest we could decline to hear it.
Well,
That
I
would
think
not be-
procedurally, it doesn't say in the statute that we have to schedule it. My view is procedurally, you should, if it's provided there, because we do need to provide due process.
Sure.
I did actually look that to see if I could find anywhere where we're actually required to actually hold it. That's not the way the statute's worded, that it has, because the application process is not required under the statute. We've done for our convenience, and the application process includes information that is under the statute, but it's not necessarily a requirement the way that we've done it. We've done it in a way just for administrative convenience. But my view would be that we would, if an application's in place, I think because of due process, we should schedule a public hearing for it and give them a proper hearing over that issue.
Does the application cover a cost to pay for the publication by the applicant?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's true. Part of the statute is the applicant is required to pay for the publication of the notice. That's actually stated within there, and would be we would inform the applicant about that prior to publishing the notice.
Can you impose a time limit on can you say 3 years?
It is
I'm just curious.
yeah. Now I found nothing which would cause you not to be able to impose a time limit, and the rules are it is strictly construed, meaning that if it's that is the burden of the party receiving the exemption to prove that they're in compliance with the exemption at all times, and it's their burden to do so. So it's a very narrowly construed exception granted. So if we were to grant an exception for, again, a van, and we say this is exceptions in place for the next 3 years, I think it's completely within the authority of the board to do so, and then the applicant would then have to come again at 3 years to seek, if assuming they still own that piece of property, to seek an exception again. The one thing to keep in mind from a revenue perspective is that personal property taxes on vehicles are relatively high. So the amount of money would for a $30,000 vehicle would be in excess of $1,000 a year. So it's not too far off some of the property taxes depend on the value of the real property.
Did I hear you say that you're not setting a precedence? If you say that we're going to exempt personal property for ABC organization.
Yep.
What prohibits XYZ organization from saying we got the same vehicle for the same type of use?
Well, they can come and say that. I mean, they go through the application process, but the fact that they have the same vehicle, same type of use should not be something that you would consider where to grant it. You would consider whether to grant it to that second organization based on the facts of that organization. Now, from a practical point of view, if we go and grant it, the facts are exactly the same, which they never are, but let's assume that they're exactly the same. Then the other party could try to say that we weren't providing them due process, we were acting capriciously and arbitrary, but that's a very difficult standard for them to reach. This is a legislative act, so as long as the board members, each supervisor, as long as you have a fairly debatable reason for why you would vote for or against the ordinance, the courts will be very reluctant to challenge it. So it's safe to say that you should not be too concerned about setting precedents, but from a practical point of view, if you grant for everyone and not for another one, that would be something you would need to have reasons for not doing so in a particular case.
Once granted, can it be revoked?
It can, I think by another ordinance, we could remove it. Yeah, we could. We can't, not retroactively. Now, clearly, if they use it contrary to the purpose of the state in their application, then the tax exemption does not apply. That's part of the strictly construed standard there. So it's very strict as to how they use it. If they violate any aspect of it, then they can no longer claim the tax exemption.
Right, but I'm suggesting for maybe other reasons, or county has decided against a policy that too much revenue is being lost, not lost, but I'm just.
No, and
hypothetically-
I think that I know of no reason which would prohibit us from doing so if we did so under by ordinance and revoke the ordinance. It's usually better this is personal view, just from a legal side of things, to not have to revoke things. I think a time limit would be better if we thought that, but we don't know what the economic situation will be 3 or 4 years down the road. So if there's a reason to do so, I think we would be justified to do so.
I mean, before I would be willing to pursue this, I would need to know the economic impact to the county of all the nonprofit organizations and what that would look like. Not saying that we would do across the board, but if you do for one, every other one's going to come in and ask. So,
and I have spoken with the Commissioner of the Revenue about the economic impact of the particular petitions that were already applications put in place. So I'm sure she would not have a difficulty getting that type of information together.
And once it's the organization and the piece of property that they own. It's not everything that the organization owns. It is the particular piece of property. So let's say it's 100 acres, and then 10 years down, and we've granted this 10 years. Now we have built more and more buildings, and everything that's on that property, would that be tax exempt, or would that be a separate process?
Now that would need to be a separate process. So when you grant the tax exemption for the property, you're granting it for the use. So when they make their application, they will identify the property and they will identify the use. So it's not just the ownership of the property, it's how it's being used. So if they have 100 acres and they have a building on there which they provide education to people visiting that place, and you decide to grant the tax exemption for that building and for the acres applicable to that building, then that would be exempt. But if they were to build a theater to put on plays, that would be a separate application they'd have to request. Again, it's strictly construed to the actual language under which the application was granted.
I would feel more comfortable within a work session to find what are the organizations that are currently, or properties that are currently tax exempt, and to feel more comfortable if we had some policy so that we weren't every time just I would like to have that before these come before us. Is that a possibility that we could?
Yeah, I don't think, as long as we act within a reasonable amount of time from when the application has come, we have, as far as I'm aware, we have one application which is completed and one that's pending. And so so we'd probably want to act within a reasonable amount of time, but if we, for example, have it in the work session and sometime in January and bring this up in February, I still think we're within a reasonable amount of time.
So they can make an application even though we don't have any type of ordinance reference in this at present.
Yeah, and I would suggest we probably wouldn't want to have these type of ordinances are ones that are like the ordinance we asked for special exceptions for property use that only apply to these particular things. And so it's generally, we could do an ordinance which would do it in a classification basis on particular types of property. But I think generally most board supervisors would probably want to keep it on the property basis because it gives you the flexibility to make individual determinations. But yeah, you could do it that you could set a general ordinance to apply for all this and not have to worry about these particular applications. You did that way, but anyone can bring in anyone who qualifies. Well, even people that don't qualify can file the application, but anyone who qualifies then would come to the board would then have to make a determination if they want to grant it, if it's justifiable to grant the exception for the particular property which they're seeking exception for. But if you require this, we're happy to prepare some sort of report where we look into where these exceptions were granted in the past, and we'll look also at the economic impact of granting exceptions.
Gentlemen, are you okay with that? Yes? All right. There's no other questions or comments. I'll move on to update on broadband grant awards. Mr. Suter.
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I need to read statements.
Yes.
I abstain from discussion regarding related to proposed agreement between Rockbridge County and Park Connects with regards to the expansion of broadband under a BOTI grant. And my disclosure statement required under Virginia Code Section 2.2-3115F is on file with the clerk of supervisors.
Okay, you ready?
Yes.
So I'll try to go through this quickly. I know I've been in front of you all many, many times in the past with broadband over the past 4 years, really. So please forgive me if I'm restating things that I've already told you. But as you know, over the past several years, the county and several of our internet service providers or RSPs have applied for both state and federal broadband grants. And recently we ran into what is ultimately a good snag, but a snag nevertheless. And Ashton touched on it at the beginning of the meeting. And it requires some wrangling. So for background, in the spring of 2023, Bark Connects, with the county's cooperative involvement, applied for a USDA Community Connect grant for about 53 miles of fiber with 333 connections in the Carterstown area. And the county's involvement in this piece was making the Lake Robertson office available as part of a grant requirement. You had to have what is known as a community center that someone can come if they can't afford, even if they're connected, but they can't afford the monthly payment, that they've got a place that they can go that's open in regular hours that they can access and have a couple computers there. So that fit the bill. And there was some money included in the grant application to construct a room out there to do that. Then, so that was in the spring of 2023. In the fall of 2023, the USDA essentially recalled the grant due to a technical error. They had in their grant guidance, they had given the wrong internet speeds that needed to be applied for under the grant. So they had to recall all the, send all the applications back, and they subsequently re-advertised the grant, and Bark then made the slight adjustment and reapplied in the spring of 2024. In the meantime, as you know, about this time last year, December 2024, the county was coordinating with Bark, Brightspeed, and Verizon to apply for 3 state grants, the VOTI grants. And not knowing whether or not at the time the Collierstown grant would even be coming back up in the spring of 2024, or if it did come back up, if Bark would be successful in that grant. We discussed among the internet providers, and I kind of negotiated, and Bark agreed that they had that grant in place or application, or would be having that application in place. And so Brightspeed applied for the exact same area, almost the exact same area in Carterstown. It was kind of a fail safe. If we didn't get the one, hopefully we get the other. So in July of 2024, then fast forward to this past July, VOTI announced that both the Bark and Brightspeed grants had been awarded from the last winter's application. They announced that in July. And so, and unfortunately, the one we didn't get, the one in Vesuvius was unsuccessful with Verizon. So then we immediately started the detailed and lengthy process of completing all the documentation, all the paperwork, and submitting all the detailed budgets and everything for the implementation of the VADI grants with DHCD, Department of Housing and Community Development. And so fast forward to last month in November, a couple days before the election, week before the election, we received notification that BARC had been awarded the USDA Community Connect grant. So we found ourselves in a somewhat unique position, and we had 2 grant awards for the same area in Collierstown. So after discussion with all parties, Brightspeed agreed to back that portion out of their grant award. And so, but we wanted to make maximum use of that funding wherever we could. So over the last several weeks in November, I worked with Brightspeed to seek other potential uses for those funds that were freed up as a result of that new award. So Brightspeed is currently rescoping that's what they call it, rescoping the project to see if there are any other unserved addresses that could be picked up in their builds. One of the ones that I suggested, of course, was Verizon, the Verizon's area in Vesuvius. That is not Brightspeed's primary service area. So, we're just trying, however we can possibly do it, we're trying to get internet to Vesuvius as well. So they are looking at that, but it's not likely that they would apply there. So they're now looking towards other areas where there are some outliers, long drops, that type of things that they could reapply. And I talked to them this morning, and they believe they're going to have that finalized by the end of the week. And so the reason for the shift in the VADI funding, or I mean the ARPA funding and the dedication of those funds, is in case we can't get this done by December 31st. At least that money has been dedicated, it's been contracted, it's been allocated. So we wouldn't have to get in an argument with anybody about returning any of the ARPA funds. So in the meantime, Mr. Dryden and I, along with the CSPDC's folks, have been working with BART and Brightspeed and VADI and DHCD to finalize contract documents prior to the end of the year, if at all possible. And so prior to having to rescope these grants, my intention had been to bring the contracts back to the board in November for approval. But given the additional time the process has taken, that wasn't possible. And since you don't have a meeting later this month, I'm requesting authorization to go ahead and execute any required grant documents, contract documents, of course, subject to legal review and approval by Mr. Dryden. And I'll try to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions, gentlemen? So we're looking for a motion to authorize staff to execute the necessary documents.
So move.
Mr. Lyons?
Yes.
Mr. Day? Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Draft CIP presentation, Mr. Harris.
you.
Yes, before you is a draft provisional CIP for fiscal years 2020, 2026 through 2030. The adoption of the provisional CIP is scheduled for January 13th, 2025, with the final adoption being in May. There's 2 new requests for FY26, and that is an additional new truck for fire and rescue and a vehicle for economic development that has her vehicle. That vehicle is needs to be surplused. The solid waste, Daniel has updated the construction costs for the 2 future solid waste sites. And he's also added replacement compactors to FY 2030. Thank you to the Finance Committee to remind me to add buses to the county's CIP. As you recall, this is beginning with this fiscal year. The county funds the buses directly. Also included is a current FY26 debt service schedule. There's also a preliminary estimate of the county share of debt financing for a new human services building prepared by Davenport and Company. That is just a preliminary, but it should help give you a total perspective of our capital costs. That and on that topic, if we currently have a for February 13th, we have a work session, or not, the first budget meeting where the external agencies present their budget request to the board. That meeting begins at 5:30. If possible, I'd like to request the board meet at 4:30 that day to have a work session with Davenport to go over both our annual financial overview, but also particular note of the debt financing for the new human services building.
What was that date again?
Yes, sir. That's
January 14th, I think we already had that.
yes. It's a special meeting. It's February 3rd.
So you want to meet at 4:30 February?
Yes, ma'am. If the board could consent to that.
That's on the budget schedule.
Yes,
Okay. It's a,
we would amend the
on the
budget.
budget
have it.
schedule would just be, it's a meeting and,
We would add,
Oh. it's
Well, it
supposed to
may-
be Same day.
yeah, same day. It may not require since you're talking about the budget and going over the budget, just going to depend on the board schedule. If you can get there at 4:30 and have that in advance. But it would be good to have Davenport present in advance of going through the budget.
yes, and they'll also be presenting to the finance committee separately before the board of supervisors so that they could anticipate any questions and concerns that might come up during the meeting. So overall, we did get one more request in today, and that was for a CIP request for $10,000 to replace the doors on this building on both Main and Randolph streets. And so that will be presented and added to the CIP for your consideration in January. And also I wanted, as I noted in my report, the original request for economic development is a quote for an SUV. We'll be looking at a cost for a car instead of an SUV. So that should bring down the cost, and that will meet the needs of Brandy's department.
All righty. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. We will move on to the consideration of requests for writ of election to the circuit court for the office of sheriff.
So real quickly, before we leave that, the CIP had asked if board members, after reviewing it in detail, if you've got anything that you would like to, any comments, any suggestions, anything that you would like to see.
Heartburn.
Yeah, and to either share that with staff and we can share it back with the finance committee and then bring it back forward on January the 14th. Or you could one-on-one talk to one member of the finance committee as well.
Or if you want additional information.
Sure.
All right, gentlemen.
If I may, just a couple comments for it, and you don't have to answer, these are just comments. The SUV, car, whatnot, I realize it's primarily for one department, but it probably shouldn't be designated for a certain department. You know, if other staff members need to use it and it's available, it should be available to use by any county staff member.
we effectively, that's what we do, with exception of ones like, we don't go grab one of the building official vehicles because they're in them all the time. Ms. Flint is probably the most frequent flyer, going, to different parts of the state, in her role, in economic development. And we did get, thank you, we got a vehicle. It's called the administrative vehicle. I've never driven it, and the only time I'll drive it is if I have a meeting in Richmond or something. But we've got one this year, that the official rule on it is the first dibs go to whoever's traveling out of town, and that's for commissioner, treasurer, county staff if they've got something out of town. So we do that, but we more frequently than you would imagine have more than one person out of town at the same time.
And even if we have two vehicles, even if they're both available, if you're just within the county, you're to take the older vehicle, which is it's an old vehicle. I forgot what it is. It's an older sheriff. He's Sheriff Impala or something. Yes, sir. It's an 07. Yes. So we encourage.
Just broke it.
So
The $10,000 for the doors, how does that factor into the Thompson living
So
that we're?
that's a good question. So, what our goal has been to, we want to get a CIP plan for the courthouse, and we want to get a CIP plan for this building. This was the one piece on this building that I really didn't think could wait. So I asked Mr. Wilson to try to get a price on that so that we might be able to go ahead. We've had situations where we have shimmed the door and shimmed the doors and shimmed the doors. And we've had situations literally where, we're checking the door going out in the evening. And if you don't check it, that thing will catch and just hang open. And they've adjusted it about as far as they can go. And I'm afraid next time they go to adjust it, we're just going to need to replace the
How old
door.
is this door?
I would assume these doors are probably from about 1992.
So it's the door, not the security, not the.
No, it's not the security. It's actual the hardware latches.
Okay, so will that part go with the new door, the
We would
actual locking?
We would
mechanism?
make sure that the locking mechanism is the same.
That's
but
another $10,000.
no, it's not. It would incorporate the existing system and the existing hardware.
Okay,
But yeah, that's the one thing thought we needed to jump ahead on in advance of the Thompson button.
And is it a key lock?
No, not right now.
It's badge.
Yes.
all right. All right, gentlemen, unless there are other comments on that, and please reach out to finance with any additional comments. We will move on. Mr. Dryden?
As you know, Sheriff Steve Funkhauser has announced his retirement for January 1st of next year. So a little bit less than a month now. Sheriff Funkhauser is a sheriff, not just for the Rockbridge County, but also for the city of Lexington. His term of office expires December 31st of 2027. Given the time frame, there's a need to schedule a special election to fill the vacancy in the constitutional office. The statutes require that the Board of Supervisors and the City Council of the City of Lexington authorize their attorneys to file a petition with the Circuit Court, and the Circuit Court will then issue a writ of election and schedule the date for which the election will take place. The legal requirements to hold a special election are that the governing bodies would have to file a petition with the court to issue a writ of election within 15 days of the date of the office is vacated. So it would have to be done under this provision, it would have to be done between January 1st and January 15th. Given that the Board of Supervisors' next meeting is on the 14th, we feel that that this issue should be brought before the board for a determination whether to proceed during this meeting. The city council of the city of Lexington has this issue to be on schedule for their meeting on December 19th. And Mr. Suter has been coordinating with the town, with the city of Lexington, and with the registrars as to some of the issues involved with scheduling the election and getting this done in coordination. I've been working with the attorney for the city of Lexington to draft the language for the petition and how the best way to legally approach this issue. Because Sheriff Funkhauser has actually given us a written statement announcing the date of his resignation, we can actually, under a separate code provision, we can actually go ahead and petition the court prior to the date that he actually retires. And that would be, so once, assuming that this board authorizes me to draft the writ of the petition for the court, and the city council of city election also does the same thing, then we would probably go ahead and do this. We would try to get this done prior to the date of his actual retirement. The governing body is required to request this writ of special election. The judge is required then to promptly schedule the date of the election. However, under the statute, if the factors justify it, the Board of Supervisors could request the court that the date of the special election be scheduled for the next general election date in November. And some of the reasons behind doing this, and the county staff, we are requesting that you consider scheduling the election for November. And it's based on certain factors. One of the factors is the cost. It costs approximately $40,000 to do a special election. If we do it at the time of the general election, the costs are reduced dramatically. The participation in special elections is historically quite low. If it's scheduled along with the general election, we normally get much higher participation. There's concerns about the level of workload that the registrar offices, both for the county and the city, given the fact that they're still finishing up some of the things tied into the November election. And there's the city of Lexington is also in the process of moving the registrar's office. And by statute, if they move the registrar's office, you cannot hold an election within 60 days of the date that you move. In this case, for them, a polling place, because they vote at the registrar's office just like we do.
Have they moved it now?
No, they're in the process of preparing to move it. They actually have to get to the author. They have to let the Attorney General Virginia know about this, and then they will move forward with it. I believe it's the end of the first half of 2024.
Yeah, they're trying to move toward the end of the first half, is my understanding. And the other thing too is the other date restriction in there is, I believe it's 60 days that the attorney generals or state board of elections or whoever approves it. I can't remember whoever approves it. They have to approve that move. I have no reason to think that they wouldn't approve it given the circumstances, but there is that time frame. And if they went that far out, then they'd have to approve it. Then they'd have to do the actual move. And then you've got the time period after the move that you can't have an election there. So all those things just add up to an unknown.
Are we going to
time frame.
even make the November date
I would.
with all of those things?
Yeah, so the other restrictions is that we actually have to, the election has to be held on a Tuesday. It cannot be held on a primary date, so the primary election this spring wouldn't work. It has to be done within 55 days of the general election, but because they're actually going to be moving their office, their election registrar's office in the city of Lexington, would probably have 60 days would probably also apply. So given those factors, given the time it takes to put this together, the county administration has recommended that we petition the court to do this in November.
Is that part of the motion that you would like?
Yes, there's an attached resolution,
Yes.
and the attached resolution does have that language in there.
So,
And by the resolution, will be authorizing myself to prepare and file the petition, and we'll be doing that in conjunction with the city of Lexington. And we've already jointly prepared the filing, though we still have some changes to make.
are we confident that all of these things will happen by the November?
Yes.
I mean, that, okay.
Yeah. I think Spencer probably can confirm that, but I think the registrars have no objection to it. And I think the city of Lexington feels that shouldn't be an issue, and it shouldn't be an issue for us. That's,
Oh, they can't postpone the November election.
no, and you,
No, but
you
wouldn't
could
necessarily, yeah.
schedule it afterwards, but then you lose some of the benefits like the cost savings. I mean,
Sure.
one of the big things is saving $40,000 is part of the reason to do that.
And it couldn't be less than 55 days after the election. So,
Do you have to, I thought, I've been through a special election at some point, but if it's beyond a certain amount of time, don't you have to ask for judicial approval?
Well, in all cases, it's actually judicial approval because it's a writ of election and the judge then is the one that actually sets the date. So even if we recommend and request for November, if the judge decides he wants another date, he's the one that makes that decision, not us. Speaking with, the Jeremy Carroll, who's the attorney for the city election, who's done quite a bit of this, he says generally it would be unusual for the judge not to agree if we have a well-reasoned petition and proper answers. So we anticipate that if we request for November, the date will be in November, but we won't know until he issues the writ of election.
I understand all the reasons that have been laid out and the reasons to ask for delay. Just in thinking about this, over the weekend, we don't get a whole lot of time to think about the things either. I just wonder about the operation of the sheriff's office. It's sort of an interim time for the leadership there in some sense. And I don't know. I mean, I don't work there. I can't necessarily speak for them. But I guess it concerns me a little bit about delaying it. I mean, if we sort of need to know who the sheriff is, to get things done. So I don't have a good answer for exactly what other option to present, but I just needed to say that I think, I don't know how exactly to address that. I don't know if it can be addressed. It may be just the way it's got to be with the current sheriff's timing announcement and all. But of course, you would have much more knowledge of that than I, but I don't know if that's a concern or not. But
It's not to me. Yeah, I think we all should support the general election in November for the date. And I think everything will be fine.
And by statute, Chief Deputy Tony McFadden will be the sheriff. He'll have all authority.
I know
of the sheriff,
that, but he's got an election coming up in a few months. It just makes things odd. But you've run a sheriff's department, I have, so I would definitely defer to your.
I did, obviously, one of the first people I went and talked to was Registrar Sheila Hall. And as Mr. Dryden commented on, they were weary. I hit them not too far after the election. And so when we finished up this report that John put the nice memo together in the package for you there, I forwarded that to Ms. Hall. And I asked her, does this meet what their thinking was? And she said she ran it by members of her board individually, and it did. She confirmed that's what they thought would be the best solution.
Just to tag on to Mr. Lewis's comments, I know the sheriff is an independently elected office, but with having an interim for 11 months, is it any type of legal issues for us or the city, in which he represents, or anything that we need to be aware of there?
No, the statute is quite clear that, Mr. McFadden would have all the authority and all the protections that a sheriff would have. And so there would be no disruption other than the fact of, until someone's actually elected, they're not